Okay. Deep dive discussion video on Deep Blue Sea 2. As you might have garnered from the original review, which, if you haven't seen yet, you can find the link down below. I was not a huge fan of this movie. Uh, I think that really what it comes down to for me is that it was a bit pointless, being just a rehash of the original with worse acting and worse effects and lower budget, and ultimately, the end credits rolled, and I just had to ask why. Why did they make this? I couldn't figure it out. Um, and aside from the cash grab intent, I really maintain I can't figure that out. Um, so, uh, to kind of dive into some of the things that happened in the movie that, um, well, I mentioned in the review the effects. And the thing that marked it down for me was the baby sharks more than anything else. Those were the moments where uh, that was one of the new elements to it. That was one of the things where when it was actually on screen and it showed them, uh, especially them jumping up out of the water to bite the guy that was hanging from the pipe there. I really, uh, I am not afraid to, or, ashamed to admit that I had a big squee moment. They were adorable. I loved them. I really did. But I had to mark it down on the effects because it really was very, very poor CG, very cheesy. Uh, had no right to be in this movie with the quality that it was. But that doesn't mean I didn't love them. I really did. It was actually one of the better parts of the movie for me, not on any plot level, but just on a fun level. Um, but I really don't have a whole lot to add in any kind of spoiler deep dive uh, level of this movie, just because I think I kind of covered most of everything I needed to in the review. Going over very detailed plot aspects, I think, is a little bit pointless. This movie is what it is. I prefer, if I were to recommend anything to anybody that enjoyed Deep Blue Sea, it would be, dust off your copy and rewatch it. That would be my recommendation. Um, but I mentioned in the review that I wanted to go over the concept of the fear quotient, and let me just bring that up here. Uh, yeah, I marked it 0. And the reason I did that was because it wasn't scary in the slightest. But I can anticipate some people's questions on this. Um, what if the intent. There we go. What if the intent was not to be scary? What if it wasn't a horror film that was designed to be scary? What if it was supposed to be a B movie schlock fest? Should I be marking it down in its own separate category of fear quotient, thereby depriving it of points if I think that the intent worked and the intent wasn't to be scary? I think that's a very fine question, and it's one that I've struggled with a fair bit, but I stand by the scoring system, and I want to explain why. The reason that I did what I did, as far as the fear quotient separate from the intent, is I believe that at the heart of it, every horror film, every monster movie, every scary film, every even suspenseful film should have an element of scariness to it. And if it doesn't, it falls down. And um, if it's trying to be something else, I think that that element of fear, of scariness, and of quality uh, suspenseful moments, quality jump scares, can still be present and should still be present. Um, Otherwise, I'm not watching a horror film. I'm watching a comedy that has blood in it. I think that that's my biggest argument towards that end. And I can think of a million examples going one way or the other. Um, I would not be grading um, Attack of the Killer Tomatoes on this channel. This channel is, strictly for horror films. Um, it's what I have the most passion with, and it's a genre of film that I hold dear to my heart. And I'm not saying that I won't be reviewing, sillier horror films. Things like Thanksgiving, I'm sure, will make an appearance on RotD at some point. But, you know, the world of art in general is very subjective. It is open to interpretation, and if it's nothing, it's a medium full of gray areas. At what point does it stop being a comedy with blood in it and start being a horror film with laughs in it? And I think that it's a very subjective thing. I think that there's no solid answer. The best I can really do is a gut feeling on it. So, if I were to look at a horror film that would be marked very high on intent of being slapsticky slash funny, and also high in the fear quotient, or at least moderately high, above average, I would look at a film like Evil Dead 2. When I first watched that, I uh, I thought it was really sufficiently creepy having Ash alone in the cabin like that. And I will admit that I watched Evil Dead 2 before I watched Evil Dead. I don't really have a recommendation as far as the order in which to watch the movies, but that's the order I watched it in. And watching him get thrashed around in the woods and then alone in the cabin as all this stuff was happening with no rhyme, reason, explanation. I mean, some loose plot devices, but you didn't know when or how the entity would strike. Yes, there was absolutely some fun Three Stooges-esque slapsticky comedy in there, which I loved. Um, but I think that there was also some pretty heavy creepy factors to it. The dancing girl in the woods was both simultaneously creepy, uh, in a moderate way at the very least, scary, and then the little when she disappeared, got me rolling on the floor laughing. It worked on many levels, but like I said, I think at the heart of it, a horror film, whether it's trying to be a monster movie with some chuckles in it, or you know, I think that fear has to be an element of it, and I think that it deserves its own category for scoring, and I think that there's no excuse for a movie to not have both its original intent, even if that intent wasn't to be a scary movie, and still have elements of scares in it. Okay, a good example of a movie that uh, would fall under the realm of comedy that has blood in it, that I would not be having on Rotted, is Tucker and Dale versus Evil. And it makes a lot of light of horror tropes. And I loved it. I love Tucker and Dale versus Evil. I thought it was fantastic. But if I get down to the intent of it, I don't think it was trying to be a scary movie at all. It was trying to be a comedy. And it was trying to be a comedy in a way that loved horror films, and wanted to bring that element into its heart. But it wasn't trying to be a scary movie at all. It was trying to be a comedy. And on the reverse side, we can look at Cabin in the Woods. That was I think, trying to be a scary movie. It had monsterish elements to it. It had all sorts of things. It was a love note, in my opinion, to horror films, covering the Hellraiser-esque things, covering the Asian horror tropes, covering all sorts of different things in what I thought was a very intellectual level, and bringing a level of comedy to it, especially through the frank um, white shirt collar discussion between the two guys behind the scenes, the operators of the situation. But it was also at the heart of it more a horror story than anything else. Both what was going on, not in the simulation's the wrong word, but through the controlled environment of the cabin. That was had some terrific horror moments in it, as well as what happened when all hell broke loose on the behind the scenes operation, and the nature of the mystery unfolding, the fact that it had mystery at its core of it, you kind of were able to figure it out and get pieces of what was going on as the film progressed, and that I think was a horror film that brought different stylistic elements into it, so that would be making the RotD reviews. So I mean, that's pretty much kind of all I want to really discuss on it. I think any more would just be ad nauseum on it. But regardless, Deep Blue Sea 2, getting back to it, I would love to hear your thoughts. If you have seen the movie, if you disagree with me, the fact that it's just basically a cheap direct-to-video remake, whether you agree with me, whether you disagree with me, I would love to hear your comments, your discussions, your criticisms. In the discussion down below. Feel free. I would love to read them and respond to them. So that should about do it for this deep dive, and we'll see you tomorrow.